You are here, perhaps not entirely sure why, but something within you knew to arrive. There's a quiet prompting in the soul that cannot be named but also cannot be ignored, a subtle tug in the spirit that brings you to spaces like this. Not because you planned it, not because you figured everything out, but because grace has been quietly guiding your steps beneath the surface of your daily life. And now, as you rest in this moment, you may feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, distant in a way geography cannot explain, or hollow in a way that no distraction seems able to fill. These sensations are not meaningless. They are not punishments. They are invitations, gentle ones, but urgent all the same, calling you not to do more, not to fix yourself, not to try harder, but to begin listening again, not with your ears, but with your soul. There is something wholly hidden in this sense of disconnection, something that speaks without sound, that offers without force, that lingers without rushing. And though it may feel like you've been forgotten or left behind or misplaced by the divine, the truth is far more tender than that, because you are not where you are by accident, and the silence surrounding you is not a void. It is a sanctuary in disguise, a place where God is not absent, but drawing you deeper by withholding what once felt so certain, so immediate, so emotionally affirming. For a long time, you may have depended on the feeling of God to remind you of His nearness, but now you are being invited into something more enduring than feeling, into the deep current of knowing that holds fast even when the surface of your soul is still and cold. You do not need to pretend you are okay. You do not need to pretend that your faith is unshaken. The truth is, faith was never meant to be a performance for others or even for God. It is not measured by how eloquently you speak your prayers or how confident you appear in your beliefs. Faith, in its most honest form, is what you practice when nothing feels certain, when the heavens seem closed, and when the divine seems impossibly far away. That is where it becomes real, not in the ease of clarity, but in the ache of confusion. And if you feel like your belief has been reduced to embers, barely glowing beneath the ash of exhaustion or doubt, then perhaps that is not the end of your faith, but the beginning of something more resilient. Sometimes God draws back not to punish, but to purify, to let our attachments fall away, to let our illusions unravel, to let our dependence on feelings or signs or outcomes be stripped down so that what remains is not our fantasy of Him, but our desire for Him. And that desire, however quiet or faint, is enough. It is the seed of intimacy. It is the firelight of divine communion that still flickers even when the wind has blown through everything else. It is okay if you feel like your prayers are just words. It is okay if your heart is numb when you sing, or if the pages of Scripture seem like paper instead of power. It is okay because the path of the soul is not always paved with emotion, and the presence of God is not limited to the places where you feel Him the most. In fact, some of the most sacred encounters begin in the absence of feeling, in silent, uncomfortable spaces where we continue to show up anyway, where we continue to whisper our need even when heaven seems quiet. This is not evidence of failure. This is evidence of formation. You are not forgotten. You are being transformed. And transformation is rarely loud, rarely quick, rarely easy. It is subtle. It is slow. It is sacred. The soul deepens not in constant light, but in the rhythm of dusk and dawn, loss and return, silence and song. So if your spiritual life feels like winter, like a long season where nothing seems to grow, take heart. Winter is not death. It is preparation. The soil does not cease to be soil because nothing is blooming. The tree does not cease to be a tree because it is bare. So you, even in your barren season, have not ceased to be loved. You have not ceased to belong. You have not ceased to matter to God. There is something deeply human about your longing. The ache you carry is not weakness. It is a signal. It tells the truth that so much around you tries to drown out, that you are made for more than surviving, more than coping, more than managing pain with shallow relief. You are made for communion. And even though you may not feel worthy of such closeness, even though your past may feel too heavy or your present too empty, the invitation still stands. God does not wait for your perfection. He moves toward your need. He does not flinch from your sorrow. He draws near to it. And what he desires from you is not a spiritual performance, but a softening, a turning, a small surrender that says, even if I don't feel it, even if I don't understand it, even if I've run far and failed often, I want to come back to the quiet center where love waits. You don't have to know the way. You don't have to get the words right. You only have to be willing to stop, to be still, to let grace catch up to you. And it will. It always does. You see, the spiritual life is not a ladder you climb. It is a river you enter. And rivers do not demand speed. They invite surrender. You do not have to thrash your way back to God. You only have to let go of the need to control the flow. Let go of your spiritual guilt, your pressure to perform, your need to earn what was always a gift. Let yourself be carried, even if only for a moment. Let the silence be a sanctuary instead of a sentence. Let the stillness become a song. In the hidden places of your soul, something eternal is still breathing, still glowing, still waiting for you to believe that you are not alone. You never were. Somewhere within the sacred hush of your longing, beneath all the questions you dare not speak aloud, and the weariness you've quietly carried for far too long, there lies a truth that does not demand proof or validation. It simply waits to be remembered. And that truth is this. Your desire for God, however fragile or fragmented, is not just a response to His love. It is evidence of His presence already working within you. You are not pursuing a distant deity. You are responding to a call that first came from Him. Before you even had language for your need, before you even noticed the emptiness inside, His Spirit was already moving toward you, already planting the ache in your heart that would one day grow into a search, a whisper, a return. The distance you feel is real, but it is not rejection. It is not abandonment. It is the echo of a deeper presence, one that hides not to harm but to heal, that withdraws not to punish but to purify, that allows the silence not as a wall but as a doorway. And when you sit in that silence long enough, not fighting it, not fearing it, you begin to hear something softer than speech, something that trembles with sacred weight, the sound of God's love making space for something deeper than answers. There are seasons when faith is loud and full of light, when prayers rise effortlessly and hope dances on your tongue like morning dew. But there are also seasons, and perhaps this is one of them, when faith is quieter than breath, slower than time, and heavier than you thought it would be. In these seasons, you do not shout your devotion, you whisper it. You do not fly, you crawl. You do not overflow with passion, you simply endure. And yet, this is where some of the most powerful spiritual work is done, not in the fire of inspiration, but in the ashes of endurance. When you cannot feel God, and yet you choose to believe He is still near, when you cannot see the way forward and yet you keep walking, when you cannot find the words to pray, and yet your soul still sighs toward heaven, this is what sacred faithfulness looks like. Not performance, not perfection, just presence, just persistence, just the trembling, stubborn decision to stay open, to stay soft, to keep showing up even when the light is gone and the room feels empty. That is where heaven leans in. That is where eternity begins to echo back. Perhaps the most confusing part of this distance is not that God feels far, but that He once felt so close. You remember those moments, don't you? The times when your heart felt pierced by a verse, when your tears flowed without warning during worship, when the presence of God seemed thick in the room, and your soul rested like a child held in loving arms. And now, by contrast, everything feels dimmed, distant, drained. You wonder what changed. You wonder if it was you, if you missed something, lost something, broke something. You search yourself for sins you might have committed, prayers you might have skipped, doubts you might have entertained. But spiritual dryness is not always the fruit of failure. Often, it is the soil in which deeper trust is grown. You are not broken, you are being broken open. And when God removes the crutches you once leaned on, emotion, routine, the comfort of clarity, it is not cruelty. It is invitation. He is inviting you to walk not by sight, not by sound, but by something more eternal. Something that cannot be lost in the silence because it was never dependent on noise to begin with. It is a holy paradox, but one worth holding close. Sometimes, God draws you closer by making you feel further away. Not to confuse you, but to cleanse you of shallow definitions of closeness. Not to discourage you, but to deepen your longing. Not to reject you, but to refine your understanding of who He is. Because if we only believe He is near when we feel Him, then we have not yet learned to trust. If we only pray when we are comforted, then we have not yet learned to love. And if we only worship when we are overflowing, then we have not yet encountered the God who meets us in our emptiness. So, let yourself stop striving for emotional highs. Let yourself stop equating spiritual silence with spiritual failure. The quiet places, the dry places, the hidden places, these are not detours. They are the path. They are where real intimacy is formed. Not the kind that burns bright and burns out, but the kind that endures through storms and shadows and years of uncertainty, because it was never based on how you felt, but on who you trusted. There is something brave in simply staying present to your soul's hunger without rushing to satisfy it, staying open to mystery without needing every answer to be spelled out, staying faithful to your daily yes, even when it feels like no one sees, no one hears, not even God. But He does. He sees the tear that never falls, the prayer that never forms, the hope that flickers like a candle in the wind but refuses to go out. And it moves Him, not because you are performing, but because you are showing up honestly. He never asked you for polish, He asked you for presence. He never asked you to impress, He asked you to return. So return, beloved, even if you are limping. Return, even if all you can say is, I'm still here. That is more than enough. That is the beginning of everything. There is a delicate beauty in the wilderness. The desert is often portrayed as a place of harshness and emptiness, but in reality, it is where true intimacy with God is cultivated. It is where the noise of the world fades and what remains is the sound of your own heart beating in rhythm with the divine. The wilderness is not punishment, though it may feel that way at times. It is a place where distractions are stripped away and you are left with nothing but the raw truth of your soul. Here, in the dry, quiet places, you are invited to confront the reality of your need for God, not as a convenience, but as your very sustenance. You may wonder where God has gone, why He feels so far away. But it is not that He has abandoned you. It is that He has brought you into this sacred space of silence to refine you, to purify your desires, and to prepare you for a deeper experience of His love. In the wilderness, you learn to rely on Him alone. You learn that He is enough, even when everything else seems uncertain. And this learning is not a process that happens quickly. It takes time, patience, and endurance. It requires trust when you cannot see the way forward, and faith when the future seems clouded. The wilderness may feel lonely at times, but it is also the place where you are most deeply known. It is where God sees you, not as a perfect version of yourself, but as the real, raw, vulnerable soul that you are. And in that seeing, He meets you with love that is patient and kind, that is gentle and restorative. In the wilderness, God is not distant. He is drawing you closer, teaching you the true meaning of dependence and reminding you that He has never stopped walking beside you. As you continue through this desert, you may begin to realize that it is not a season to escape, but a season to embrace. There is no rush to get out of it, because in this wilderness, you are becoming something you could never have been without it. You are becoming someone who knows how to stand in the silence and listen, someone who understands that God's voice is not always thunderous or grand, but often soft and still. In the desert, you learn to trust the small movements of the Spirit. You begin to recognize His presence not in loud declarations or overwhelming emotions, but in the subtle shifts within your heart. Where once there was doubt, now there is a quiet trust. Where once there was fear, now there is a gentle peace. You learn that God is not limited to the moments of joy and triumph, but is just as present in the barren places, in the hard moments, in the struggle. It is in the desert that you are refined, not for what you can accomplish for Him, but for who you are becoming in Him. And that transformation, though slow, is nothing short of miraculous. The wilderness is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a new kind of closeness with God. Here, in the silence and the emptiness, you discover a deeper sense of His love and a stronger awareness of His presence. The desert does not dry you out. It waters the roots of your faith, helping you grow strong in ways that the abundance of comfort and ease never could. If you find yourself walking through a desert season right now, know that you are not alone. This is not a sign of failure or abandonment, but an invitation to go deeper. The dryness you feel is not an absence of God, but a call to something more. It is an invitation to seek Him, not for what He can give, but for who He is. It is an opportunity to lay down the distractions and the noise and simply be with Him. This is where the real transformation happens, not in striving, not in achieving, but in surrendering. And though the desert may feel barren, it is in these moments that you are most fertile, most open to receiving the seeds of grace that God is planting within you. Trust the process. Trust that God is at work, even in the silence. Trust that He is drawing you closer to Himself, even when you cannot see the way forward. The wilderness is not your enemy. It is your teacher, your companion, and your refining fire. Embrace it, and you will find that in its emptiness, you are being filled with something far more precious than you could ever imagine. There is a quiet revolution that happens when we begin to look for God, not just in the miraculous, but in the mundane. For so long, we have been conditioned to expect His presence in the dramatic, the healing moment, the answered prayer, the emotional high of worship, but the reality of divine intimacy is far more tender, far more consistent, and far more grounded than fleeting feelings or spectacle. Sometimes, He speaks not through thunder, but through your morning routine. Not through parting seas, but through the sound of dishes being washed, or the way sunlight filters softly through a curtain. And if you are willing to slow down enough, to open your soul even slightly, you'll begin to notice that there is a sacred rhythm pulsing underneath the ordinary. That nothing, no moment, no breath, no glance, is truly secular when your heart is turned toward God. You might be surprised to find that He has been with you in more places than you thought, in the laughter of a child, in the patience of a friend, in the resilience it took for you just to show up one more day. He is not waiting for you only at the altar or within the pages of your devotional. He is already in the hallway, in the commute, in the silence between your thoughts. The sacred does not compete with the ordinary, it transforms it. The kitchen table becomes a sanctuary. A tired walk becomes a pilgrimage. Your home becomes a temple of presence when your awareness begins to awaken to the truth. God has always been near. This awareness, however, often begins with memory. When you feel far from God, one of the most powerful things you can do is remember. Not as a nostalgic escape into the past, but as an anchoring truth for your present. The spiritual life is not only forward movement, it is also sacred recollection. There are moments in your life, perhaps buried under dust and distraction, where you truly knew, that God was real, that He was close, that He was speaking. These moments matter. They are not just sentimental artifacts. They are markers, altars, signs along the road that point you back to where you've come from and who has been guiding you. Make it a practice to recall them. Speak them aloud. Write them down. Let them rise like embers in the cold of your doubt. They are not there to make you long for what was, but to remind you of what still is. Just because the feeling has faded does not mean the truth has changed. God does not visit and then vanish. He abides. And sometimes, remembering how He moved in your past gives you the faith to trust that He is moving in your present, even if you cannot yet perceive it. Memory, when paired with faith, becomes a bridge. It carries you across the chasm of confusion. It becomes the sacred act of saying, He was faithful then, and He will be faithful now. There is something sacred, too, in your smallest acts of faith. We often think of spiritual growth as something that happens in large, visible ways. But more often than not, it's what you do when no one is watching that forms the roots of your relationship with God. Lighting a candle and whispering a single prayer. Sitting in silence, not because you feel anything, but because you are still choosing to show up. Choosing kindness when you feel empty. Opening the scriptures, not for answers, but for presence. These small choices are not meaningless. They are seeds, and though they may take time to bloom, they will. God honors the quiet faithfulness of a soul who continues to reach for Him, even through numbness, confusion, or sorrow. You may not feel it right away, but these small acts are forming something unshakable within you, a deeper trust, a steady peace, a clearer sense of who God is beyond emotion or performance. It is in these moments, these barely noticed choices, that your faith becomes real. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've chosen to keep walking, even when the road is unclear. And do not underestimate the power of community in this walk. You were never meant to carry the weight of your spiritual life alone. When your faith feels fragile, lean into the faith of those around you. Let their voices sing when yours is silent. Let their prayers be the rope that pulls you forward. It takes humility to say, I can't carry this by myself, but that humility opens the door for divine strength to meet you through others. Sometimes, God speaks not through your own heart, but through the tenderness of someone sitting beside you, through the quiet presence of someone who listens without judgment, through the love that persists even when you feel undeserving. The body of Christ is not a metaphor, it is a living, breathing expression of God's care for you. So find your people. Seek out safe spaces. Share what hurts. And let the connection between hearts become a vessel for the presence of God, carrying you when your own strength runs low. And so, beloved soul, we arrive at the gentle conclusion of this long and winding inward journey, not with fireworks, not with final answers, but with something even more sacred, a deeper stillness, a quieter confidence, a rekindled knowing that even in the most barren stretches of your spiritual path, you have not been walking alone. If anything, what you've discovered along this sacred thread of reflection is that what once felt like divine absence was often hidden nearness, that the silence was not empty, but pregnant with presence, that the ache was not a wound, but a whisper. You are not broken because you doubted. You are not lost because you wandered. You are not unloved because you felt nothing. These are the growing pains of a soul expanding its understanding of God beyond the limitations of feeling and into the sturdiness of truth. And the truth is this: you are held, even now. You are seen, even in your most obscure place. You are loved with a depth and clarity that your mind may never fully comprehend, but your spirit already knows. This love does not come and go like emotion. It is covenant. It is the vow of a God who does not abandon the ones He calls His own. And that includes you, especially you. So what now? What do you do when you rise from this space, when the words fade, when life crowds in again with its noise and needs and distractions? You return not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly. You return to your quiet prayers. You return to your small rituals. You return to that one verse that still burns in the back of your mind. You return to the choice to believe, even when it doesn't make sense. And if all you can do is whisper, I'm still here, then that is enough. That is holy. That is heard. Because God is not moved by the volume of your worship, but by the truth of your heart. He listens for authenticity, not eloquence. And in this way, every act of turning toward him, no matter how hesitant, how quiet, how broken, is a victory, a spiritual triumph that resounds in heaven. Do not measure your worth by your emotional response. Measure it by your willingness to keep showing up. That is the soil in which deep roots are planted. That is where the unshakable faith is formed, not in the storm's escape, but in the steadfastness of standing within it, heart open, eyes lifted, soul waiting. You are not a spiritual failure because you feel tired. You are not weak because you crave clarity. You are not behind because you don't always understand how to feel close to God. You are human, and humanity has always been the canvas upon which divinity writes its most tender stories. God delights in meeting you here, not in the polished version of your life, but in the actual version, the one with smudged pages, unanswered prayers, complicated feelings, and hopeful steps. And if you listen, truly listen, not with your ears but with your whole being, you will begin to discern his voice not just in sermons or sacred songs, but in the laughter of those you love, in the moments of unexpected peace, in the quiet courage it takes for you to rise again each morning. This is the language of heaven. It is not always loud, but it is always present. So take heart, not because everything is fixed, but because something within you is rising again. Perhaps not loudly, perhaps not quickly, but steadily, sacredly. It is the slow unfurling of trust. It is the tender growth of hope. It is the subtle reawakening of belief in a God who has not grown tired of you, who has not moved on from you, who still desires you, entirely, intimately, eternally. And if nothing else, let this moment remain as your altar of remembrance. Let it be the place you return to when the distance creeps in again. Let it be your sacred echo. I was not alone. I was being drawn deeper. The fog will lift. The clarity will come. But until then, walk gently, trust deeply, and live slowly. There is no rush. God is not waiting at your finish line. He is walking with you in every uncertain step. Let that truth become your rest. Let it become your song. Let it become your sanctuary. And when you feel your spirit growing quiet again, do not fear. That quiet is not empty. It is full of the one who has always been speaking, always been loving, and always been near. Amen.